Hi, I'm Spencer Ziegler.
I'm Serena Halstead.
Hi, and I'm Mellisa Smith, and welcome to Data Lit Podcast.
Welcome back to episode 2 of 3 in our grading conversation with author and educator Rick Wormeli. The last episode, we talked a bit about the purpose of grades and the purpose of grading policies. And we ended by talking about accountability, and that's right where we're going to pick up with this episode. So let's hear from Rick.
Way a long time ago, when I wrote articles on accountability, and I was trying to do a lot of research, and I was asking a lot of people. I came across the Yale Business School of management, I guess, and their definition of accountability is a mutual commitment to the other's success, a mutual ethos. So I'm looking out for you, and you're looking out for me. So that relationship in the classroom is, I honor you by knowing you well. Time in your company is time well spent. The student is given proof every day that they're worth having their name remembered and uttered by a respected adult in the community. And I make sure you see yourself in the lessons. You have a seat at learning's table, so you have a role to play. And I bring in your life, your culture, your earned insights, your narrative into the math, the science, the social studies, the coding, the art, as much as I can. And if you see me doing that, and I differentiate according to what I know about you as needed to maximize your learning, whatever it is, and I've got the skill set, the large repertoire to do that, your side of it is this, if you're the student. If I ask you to do something that you don't normally like to do, or you find it boring, you do it. You endure it because it's Mr. Wormeli asking. So we're doing homework at night. And I got all this homework. Well, I don't want to disappoint Mr. Wormeli, so I'll at least do his. We enter into mutual ethos. I've got your back. And I will not humiliate you, nor will I let you humiliate yourself. So we want to be like, run, Barry, run, if you're into the flash as we do this, and not just document how they fall short and share it with everybody else involved. If they see that you're truly out for their success, they will admit candidly things like, I can't read. So that's why I didn't do last night's homework, because I didn't want to give you more proof that I was an idiot or ammunition with which you could reject me. I'm worried that I don't belong as it is, or whatever it might be. The core of every child is not laziness or apathy. I 100% guarantee it. Those are coping mechanisms to deal with something else that is happening in their life. So opioid, alcoholism in the family, loss of normalcy because of COVID, the emotional out of whack sleep cycles as well. Worry about mom and dad with the economic downturn. All the different things are going on. And so they're coping with something. I need to address that other thing. But never assume they want to be lazy, because I guarantee they crave success, complexity, to do demanding things, to want to please others, to want to belong. And so if they ever present the facade, the fake front of apathy, they're just trying to cope with something. But I need to be the adult who knows that about the students I serve, which means I need to find value in getting to know my kids individually, not just as one more paper to grade.
Yeah. And I think I found reading your book, it was this roller coaster of emotion where I'd be excited and feel inspired, but then I'd also feel just deep shame about stuff that I did in the classroom where I was like,
no, I don't want you to feel like that. I want to feel like the door is opening. There's opportunity now.
Well, that's hopefully I can, air out my shame so that other teachers won't make the same mistake. And so when you're talking there, you're chatting about, motivating kids through these relationships, through this different prism, how to view accountability. And I thought back at times in which I were to use grades as a motivational tactic.
Yeah, I did that too.
Do X or Y because it will gain or lose you points. And you point out in your conversation, and fair isn't always equal, that this can be detrimental. So can you, if we could somehow craft a time machine and you can go back in time, 10 years and talk to teacher me, what would you tell me about trying to motivate kids with grades?
I will tell you that most teachers who have never had a course in the schools of teacher ed on human motivation, tenacity, self-discipline, self-efficacy, executive function, they overly rely on the grade book for classroom management and student motivation because they're just operating from ignorance, just not knowing, and that's fixable, absolutely fixable, no problem. So a district, I remind you guys, as you support the teachers, that that's something you can do. We can say, what do we know about high school, middle school, elementary students, and what leads to their investment in their learning and developing tenacity and stick-to-itiveness and respect for deadlines and starting the project in the week it was assigned, not 5 weeks later, the night before it was due, bringing their homework. What do we know about that? None of that, I guarantee it, says use grades. In all the research, in all the planet, in all the galaxy, might as well go to hyperbole now, that we have found, there's nothing that says, oh yeah, give them an F when they screw up. That chases them away. It pushes them away from investing in the teacher's message, but also in the academics and in themselves, because that invokes ego, and that's self-preservation. What do cornered animals do? Bite. They make an irrational rationalization. Well, school is stupid. My teacher hates me. Why bother? Yeah. And I remind everybody listening that we are supposed to assess and teach to engender hope, not despair. Right. You have a child without hope, the child has nothing left to lose and will always choose an easy way out to escape the learning, the burden of the learning. Basically, if I differentiate instruction and assessment, I can take you to the moon and we can do all these things. But if I don't differentiate, it's very easy on you. It's not very demanding because you can slough off. You can develop learned helplessness and make excuses. You can be overly dependent on the need for external validation to find your sense of value. And we're trying to say, oh no, you own your learning and you are an instrumental part of that learning and that assessment. You get to help design some of the next steps in instruction, in fact. So this is agency. So do teachers conduct themselves to position students as agents of their own learning? And that would be voice and choice. Little autonomy there, some mastery and a sense of purpose. Dan Pink's Drive comes to mind. If you have not read that book yet, I would do that. And then I would say, so if that's the case, if I take something away that you've been used to using as a way for coercion and bribery and motivation, I have to replace it with something of equal or greater practicality, or you won't find what I say credible. So I'm going to remind you that means you need to get up to speed. And I'm going to suggest some areas: student agency, executive function, teacher-student relationship, meaning making, not just sense making. Many teachers stop at sense making, and it should be about meaning making, differentiated instruction, and then a lot of those enticement elements like storytelling, use of props, cadence and rhythm in the lesson design. Then what is your expertise in cognitive science? How the brain of a 15-year-old best learns versus a 7-year-old versus an 18-year-old. I better see that expertise in your lesson and manifest, or I'll doubt the lesson's motivational elements and thereby its effectiveness. There are more in that, but that's a really good running start at those particular elements there. That's what I would tell your 10 years earlier self, not 10-year-old self. And my earlier self is, there's all these practical tips, but you're doing this other thing because you didn't have the training in that. And it opens these doors. I'll put it this way, and then I'll clam up on this one. I have teachers who are like, oh my gosh, where was this my whole life? When they study what we know about motivation and tenacity and so on, and they see the results right away. And that creates what Tom Guskey would say is a teacher's psychological reward. And when we see the positive impact on students and their investment and ultimately their learning, they're way more likely to continue with those tools. But if those tools are not in teachers' hands, it is reasonable, although it's unfortunate, but it is reasonable for them to fall back on the only thing they know, that momentary extrinsic coercion. So there's a big difference between being engaged and being on task, and we want to make sure they're engaged.
Rick, before we go on to the next question, can you just explain a little bit between the difference between sense making and meaning making? I'll be honest, I haven't really heard of that delineation. Sure. And so if you can just give us a quick, what do you mean about the difference between those two?
Well, to be really honest, I got excited about that about 25 years ago when I was hearing David Sosa, How the Brain Learns and his series of books, and Carol Ann Tomlinson talk about it, so which is differentiated instruction. They were combining their powers for good and not evil. It was great. And I know both of them. So I was talking to them about it. And true enough, I look back at my lessons and I was doing that. What are the parts of a plant? Memorize those. Great. What are the 5 differences between Middle Ages architecture and Renaissance architecture? What is Spanish preterite? Conjugate the verbs, whatever it might be. That's basically sense making. Meaning making is where students make connection. So they recode something they're learning in the classroom in terms of something they already find familiar. So an example, I was teaching geometric planes one time, planes in geometry. And one student said, yo, Mr. Wormeli, stop there. You should just know, background here, I overtly teach my students to construct and deconstruct metaphors in science, math, history, PE, anything I teach, because metaphor genesis and deconstruction is huge for making connection. I wrote a whole book on that. I'm just really excited about it. I'll talk your ear off another time. It's the world of cognitive linguistics. But now back to the example.
Okay.
Just remember, I overtly teach my kids to do this. Okay. So now, the student said, I'm the pitcher for our ball team. And we have pitcher's mounds that are, raised up above the grass and some that are even with the grass. If the runner is running the bases and it's just even with the grass, we're on the same plane. But if the runners are the bases and I'm on the mound and the mound is raised up, we're on 2 different planes. Is that what you're saying? And that's indeed what I was saying. What he did is he was constantly thinking of, well, that's just like, or that's not like. Well, it turns out humans are in ceaseless comparison. I mean, seriously, people listening to me right now are thinking, well, that's just like, or that's not like. And if you come up with a really good metaphor, suddenly there's like mini epiphany. Oh, I get it. And you carry it forward. For that research, for that book, I interviewed pastors and rabbis. And I said, tell me about the use of metaphors. They go, oh, that's the golden thing for a pastor. For the message to get through, you got to find a metaphor of like biblical or Quran or Torah, scripture or whatever it is, and then connect it somehow to their lives, and it will be resonant and carry it forward. So as we look at lesson plans, it's very easy to do sense making, which is just this. But then do we move to relationships, connections, and patterns? This caused that. This led to that. These 3 came together to cause this, or this is like that. So that's validation of the learning, but it's connection to other things. And boy, does it work. Kids, I'll say quantitative, qualitative analysis in chemistry class, and then we do it in poetry. We do quantitative, qualitative analysis of poems. And these are, now they really get quantitative, qualitative. I'll do revolution versus rotation. And in the science idea, revolving around external access, revolving around an internal access. And then I say, what does that look like in a sport? What does that look like, of course, in the solar system? What does it look like in fruit or animals or in literature? One time I did that, and my students, you might remember Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code.
Yes.
Well, everybody at that time wrote books on archaeological thrillers involving the Catholic Church, and maybe Christ had a wife or a son or whatever it was, right? And it was all these thriller things, and spy things. Well, he said, this one student of mine said, look at all the things that spiral around Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code. Da Vinci Code was the hub, and all these things were revolving around it, and they were able to make the connection and define revolution very appropriately. Look at what it looks like in another domain. So I overtly teach kids to memorize all the possible analogies that we have found K-12. And so now they're reading something new and they go, Mr. Wormeli, that is tool is to tool user. That is category to example of something in the category. That is to increasing intensity. Yeah. When you have that memorized, you can unwrap things yourself. And this is about self-efficacy. And then you find so much more meaning and connection with that brand new text you've been assigned to read. By the way, along those lines, I also teach my students, and I hope everybody else does too, to memorize at least 200 to 300 Latin word roots and prefixes, elementary, middle, and high school. Why? I've had students running down the hall. Mr. Wormeli, I was the only one who knew what biology was. Logi study of bio living things, biology. And I'll just say, isn't biology great? And then we come to a word like cephalopod, and they know that CEPH is head, ped is foot. So head, foot, animal, that's what cephalopod is. Squid. That's what square and mollusca. And they go, and the door hinges blow off as the door blows open. And now they own their learning and they're not reliant on somebody else. That's meaning making. And so we could talk more about that, but that's my initial definition, is that aha connection.
I like that. That ties to cognitive science, that we want the stuff to go out of working memory into long-term memory, build neural pathways. So if you can hijack that by connecting the stuff they're learning to these already reinforced neural pathways that are there, you just made me think. Remember, very little, if anything at all, goes to long-term memory unless it's attached to something already in storage. Mm-hmm. So one of the great skills a teacher can have, great strategy, is to create prior knowledge where there was none. Yeah. So on Wednesday, if I'm teaching you something that I need to stick, it's really important. You better believe that on Monday and Tuesday, I'm going to do prior knowledge building experiences at the very least for the 7 kids who don't have any background or for the whole class. So then I don't have to differentiate. I don't have to do anything else. But why is effective instruction on a Wednesday? I don't need to remediate later because every child has an equal access to the material and it will stay with them. Many kids can learn something brand new cold, but they forget it within a few days if there's nothing to which to connect it, which is the meaning making part.
Right.
And nothing motivates like success. A week later, you still remember. A month later, you still know it.
Right. So I'm listening to you and I'm hearing all of this enthusiasm. It puts me back as if you're in that classroom and you're remembering, how you're helping your students to make that connection. And so my question here, this is coming from one of your 10 approaches to avoid when, not to penalize students. And I'm looking at the question, I'm thinking to myself, well, that connection, students need that connection to make that meaning, right? So my question to you is this. As a teacher, students maybe got a chance before to attempt a task that was given, and then it wasn't done well, so you give them another try at it, for example, the test. And maybe in a discussion with teachers, we might say, I'm going to penalize a student for that second attempt. I'm not going to give them that full 100 because this is the second time around they're seeing it. What would you say in terms of coaching me back then, not knowledgeable about, giving second chances? How would you coach me to think about that differently in terms of how I'm going to score my students if I give them a second attempt?
I like the way you phrase that. How would you coach me? Not, what are you worried about and what are you thinking about as you see me do that policy? Those are two very different things right now. And so I really appreciate that. And I wish more leadership would think that way and colleagues would do that. So one of the things that we always want to do is always going to go back to what we have in common. What do we universally believe if we think something is going to be a little bit contentious? So I would have hoped, and if we had never done it, I would now do it. I would say, tell me more about that rationale and have them kind of walk through that. But I would want to lead them as a coach. Remember, a coach is somebody who doesn't say, here's what you should do. What we do is we ask questions to get you to arrive there yourself, because then you'll own it. Otherwise, it's very passive. And we want to make it active. Otherwise, it won't sit, it won't take, and it won't internalize. So I want to get across, well, what is the goal here? Is the goal that they learn it? And hopefully they would say, yes, great. So they chose not to use their time wisely, or they tried, but it wasn't effective. So if our goal is competence, would denying the reiteration achieve that goal? Well, no. So I might say things like, how does that help you achieve your goal of student competence in that topic? And they eventually say, well, it really doesn't. Okay, good. And let's take a look at what we know about teaching responsibility and, study habits and so on. Oh, look, none of it says deny redos. None of it says knowingly falsify the grade by giving like half credit for the things you go back and correct. It says, oh, no, grades are about accurate communication. How they came to it is reported separately from what they know at the end of learning's journey. So what we go back to the larger principles at play. Then we start forward again and we talk about it and we see if there's a policy that would lead to the goals that we have set. The second thing I would do as a coach is I would say, let's take a look about you learning your craft as a teacher just for a moment. First time you teach a unit, 5 periods a day if it's a high school or middle school teacher, more than likely. And you say the first time you teach it, guinea pig class. You make all your mistakes. And the second period, wow, you're much better at teaching that lesson. By the time you get to the end of the day, you've had 4 more redos. So you're streamlined, you cut out stuff. It looked good on paper, but wow, with real children, not so much. And so you got better and better, and that's how you did. You grant yourself that. We all grant ourselves that we're going to be better as teachers. But one and done rarely is the way any one individual, including morphing insecure humans, become competent. So if your goal is competence, you got to think, would the alternative be any better? So would incompetence be maturing and preparatory for the next level, the next unit, next grade? No, it wouldn't. Great. So let's err on the side of competence. Now, a third approach as a coach is I would say, where does the child learn the specific skills for time management, impulsivity control, distractibility control, timely adherence to deadlines, getting your supplies, how to study? Where does they learn that? Do they learn it by having an unrecoverable 0 or F put on this? Or do they learn it by saying, I made a huge mistake. I screwed up. Now I need to go back through and do it all over again as I'm also moving forward to the new curriculum where the teacher's moving forward. This is not seen as a treat. This is something where I now have no discretionary free time. It is far more demanding for a teacher, in a sense, this is in quotes, in a sense, to get in a child's face and walk side by side with them as they recover from that poor decision, or they tried really hard and they just didn't use the right skills. So it may not have been a poor decision. They just might have been inadequate to the task, or it might have been developmentally inappropriate. But I walk with you on that path rather than scold you from afar, slapping the F on there, unrecoverable, and assuming that a grade teaches. If you study, and I know I said this earlier, but if you study how to develop self-discipline, none of it says give a permanent unrecoverable F. That'll learn them. That's you expressing lack of expertise in our profession. And again, wow, is that fixable? And there's so much hope in that, but you have to be open to that. Now, one last little bit. I have to tell you, I do second career training. So scientists, mathematicians, software engineers, every branch of military service, and they all see the merit of reiteration. You screw up, you go back and do it again. It is the scientific method. It is the way the military works, because incompetence is the fuel of war. People die. So you will do this over and over and over until you are magnificent in this. And I will not let you out there until you get it. All of that stuff, they get it. It's people who went to college and then right into the classroom that are usually the most hesitant and the ones that deny redos. Everybody who comes from working for 20 or 30 years in the field, they already get, oh no, that's exactly what you do. I'm not going to let your immaturity, your lack of development get in the way of your destiny. I'm not going to cave into that, because that's abdicating your adult role. And your adult role is to get in there and walk with them, make sure, by golly, they learn it, because it was that important for us to decide students at that grade level learn. It's that important then that we engage on it until it is learned, not just give up on it, which is really letting the child escape the burden and the intensity of his learning. And that doesn't teach a whole lot.
And that brings us to the end of part 2 of our 3-part grading series. Join us next time when we talk about what teachers might want to consider at the start of a school year and what the pandemic has taught us about grading practices. Don't forget to subscribe to our Data Lit podcast wherever you get podcasts. And for the notes or to contact us, you can go to www.wcpss.net/datalit. And thank you to Cary High School student Logan Foster, who provided the music for this grading series. And we'll catch you next time when we finish up our grading series.